At Thanksgiving dinner, my grandmother suddenly shouted in front of the entire family, "Why is there an elderly couple living in the $1 million lake house I bought for you?" I froze. The only thing I managed to say was, "What are you talking about? I don't even have a house right now. I'm sleeping on my cousin's couch." At that exact moment, my sister's face turned pale. And right then, the lawyer arrived. My grandmother had been out of the country for 3 years, working under a consulting contract in Singapore. She and I had always been incredibly close, the kind of grandmother who secretly slipped a $20 bill inside your birthday card and remembered every random little thing you'd ever told her. Before leaving, she told me she had done something important for me, something to make sure I'd be okay. She never really explained what it was. I assumed maybe it was a savings bond or some small investment. I didn't press her for details. That ended up being the last real conversation we ever had. After that, the letters stopped coming, or at least, that's what I thought. At the time, I was juggling 2 jobs at once. During the day, I worked at a restaurant. At night, I did remote data entry work for $14 an hour. I was sleeping on my cousin's couch, eating whatever I could scrape together for less than $11 a day. I had $340 left in my bank account and $27,000 in student loan debt. Every time I thought about reaching out to Grandma, I convinced myself she was busy, that the silence probably made sense. I repeated that story to myself so many times. I eventually believed it. Meanwhile, my sister Jessica never seemed to struggle with anything. She had married a guy named Ryan the year before, and they were constantly posting pictures online, trips, fancy dinners, home renovations. I remember one specific post. Our new vacation home. There was a hashtag underneath, a photo of a beautiful lake, a gorgeous house, a huge deck overlooking the water. I double-tapped the picture and kept scrolling, too exhausted to let myself feel anything more complicated than simple jealousy. Then everything changed. My grandmother came back 6 weeks earlier than expected. She didn't tell anyone. The moment she landed, she rented a car and drove straight to the lake property she had purchased under my name. She knocked on the front door. An elderly couple answered, Ryan's parents. They had been living there for over 2 years, paying Jessica $4,000 a month in rent, and they had absolutely no idea that legally, the house belonged to me. Standing right there on the porch, Grandma immediately called my aunt. She told her to find me, but specifically not through my parents. A few minutes later, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Don't ask questions. Call this number now." So I called. Grandma answered, and in about 4 minutes, she explained everything. Her voice was flat, controlled. I knew that tone. That was how she sounded when she was furious but forcing herself not to explode. Apparently, my family had been telling her that I was emotionally unstable, that I couldn't handle money, that I wasn't responsible enough to manage something as valuable as a property, but not to worry. Because they were taking care of everything for me. They said they were protecting me, that it was all for my own good, that they had everything under control. I hung up and sat down on the last step outside my cousin's apartment building. My phone still felt warm against my ear. 3 years. 3 years believing my grandmother had abandoned me. 3 years making excuses for her inside my own head. And the truth was, she had bought me a house. A real house. $1 million lake house. While I was counting quarters for bus fare. While I was eating instant noodles standing in someone else's kitchen. My hands were shaking. Not from sadness. It was something uglier than that. Something hot rising from my stomach all the way into my throat, something that made it impossible to swallow. I called back the number my aunt had texted me from. Grandma picked up immediately. "Are you still there?" she asked. "I'm here." "Good." There was a pause. Then she said, "You're coming to Thanksgiving dinner, day after tomorrow, at your parents' house. Don't tell anyone we spoke." "Don't say a single word." I hesitated. "Grandma, I don't even know if they'll let me in." There was silence for a second. Then her voice turned colder. "Let you in? I'll be there, and someone else is coming with me. You just show up, sit down, and leave the rest to me." Before I could ask who she meant, she hung up, and somehow, those next 2 days felt longer than the last 3 years. Those next 2 days dragged on forever. I kept going to the restaurant. I kept doing data entry at night, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. But I wasn't really present. It felt like I was moving through everything on autopilot. My mind was somewhere else. On Wednesday, Jessica texted me. "You coming tomorrow? Mom's asking." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then replied with a single word, "Yeah." A few seconds later, she reacted with a little heart emoji. I kept staring at that stupid heart, thinking about that photo by the lake, the giant deck, the $4,000 a month, and now knowing exactly where all that money had been going. Thanksgiving Day. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 3 o'clock. I was wearing the only decent sweater I still owned. It had started stretching out from being washed too many times. The house smelled like turkey, cinnamon, and that familiar smell of the place where I had grown up, always feeling like the extra person, the one nobody really wanted there. Jessica opened the door. She was wearing a brand new dress, gold earrings I'd never seen before. "You made it," she said. Then in less than half a second, I caught her eyes scanning me from head to toe, judging. Ryan was in the living room holding a beer, laughing with my dad. My mother stepped out of the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. No one hugged me. No one even smiled. I sat down at the edge of the couch, the same exact place I always sat. And then the doorbell rang. My mom walked over casually, assuming it was probably the neighbors, but when she came back into the living room, all the color had disappeared from her face. Behind her walked my grandmother, 3 years without seeing her. And somehow she looked exactly the same. Straight posture, sharp expression, firm as ever. She was gripping her purse with both hands like there were bricks inside it. The entire room went silent. Jessica immediately stood up. "Grandma?" Her voice cracked halfway through the fake smile. "We had no idea you were back already." Grandma didn't answer, not even a glance. She walked straight into the middle of the living room, then searched the room with her eyes, until she found me. And suddenly, it felt like nobody else existed in that house, just her and me. Finally, without raising her voice, she said, "Before dinner, I'd like someone to explain something to me." Then very slowly, she turned toward Jessica and asked, "Why is there an elderly couple living in the $1 million lake house I bought for your sister?" My father froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Ryan stopped smiling instantly. I couldn't move. I could feel every eye in that room landing on me at once. I finally forced the words out. "What are you talking about, Grandma?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted, much smaller. "I don't even have a place to live right now. I'm sleeping on my cousin's couch." Jessica turned pale. Not nervous pale, terrified pale. The exact same face she used to make when we were kids and got caught lying. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Grandma, this is a misunderstanding. Let me explain." Grandma's eyes narrowed. "No." Her voice was ice. "You're not explaining anything." She adjusted the purse strap on her shoulder, then said, "That's why I brought someone who explains things better than you do." And right then, the doorbell rang again. Grandma didn't move. My dad stood up slowly and walked toward the door, still completely confused. A man in a gray suit stepped inside. He carried an old leather briefcase, thin glasses resting low on his nose. He calmly nodded at everyone in the room, like someone who already knew exactly what kind of mess he was walking into. "Good afternoon," he said. "My name is Attorney Wilson. I'm here representing Mrs. Margaret Harper." He placed the briefcase on the coffee table, opened it, then pulled out a thick folder. My stomach dropped, because written across the tab was my name. He looked around the room, completely calm, then said, "I have here the original property deed for the lake house." He slowly rested his hand over the folder, and I believe several people in this room, a pause, are about to become very interested in whose name is listed on it. Jessica collapsed back onto the couch. Ryan immediately stood up, still holding the beer. "Wait a second," Ryan snapped. "Who exactly are you?" "My parents rent that house. We're the ones managing the property." Attorney Wilson adjusted his glasses, didn't even flinch, then calmly repeated, "Managing?" He tilted his head slightly. "A property that has never, not for one single day, belonged to either of you?" Then he opened the folder, and in that exact moment, with the Thanksgiving turkey getting cold on the table, and my entire family holding their breath, I realized something had just broken forever inside that room, but for the first time in 3 years, the one breaking apart wasn't me. Attorney Wilson pulled out the first document from the folder and carefully placed it on the coffee table, right beside the untouched appetizer tray. He spoke slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "This is the original deed for the lake property, signed 3 years ago." He pointed to the first line. "Here we have the purchaser, Mrs. Margaret Harper." Then he moved his finger farther down the page. "And here?" He paused. The name of the person ownership was legally transferred to on that exact same day. Then he turned the document so everyone in the room could see it. My chest tightened. There it was, Emily Harper, my full name, printed in black ink, stamped and notarized. Attorney Wilson looked directly at Ryan and Jessica. From the very first day, this property has legally belonged to Miss Emily Harper. Ownership has never changed hands. No other name has ever been registered in county records. He leaned back slightly. None. The silence in the room thickened instantly. I couldn't stop staring at the paper. 3 years sleeping on borrowed couches, counting bus fare, stretching $11 across entire days, and all this time, my name had been sitting on the deed of $1 million house. Jessica was the first one to react. She straightened herself on the couch and gave a nervous little laugh. That same laugh I remembered from childhood, the one she used whenever she got cornered. Okay. Everybody calm down. She crossed her arms, trying to regain control. Yes, the house is technically in Emily's name. Of course it is. We never said otherwise. She turned toward me, then back toward Grandma. The thing is, Emily wasn't in any condition to manage something like that. Her voice became softer. Fake concern. The same tone she always used when manipulating people. Everyone knows she can barely manage her own life. She gestured toward Ryan. Ryan and I were simply taking care of the property for her, making sure it didn't go to waste. Paying taxes, maintenance. Attorney Wilson interrupted immediately, collecting $4,000 a month. Jessica froze. Her mouth stayed open for a second. Excuse me? Wilson reached into the folder again, pulled out another stack of papers. The couple currently living in the property, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks. He looked toward Ryan. Your parents have been transferring $4,000 every month directly into Jessica Harper's bank account. He flipped through pages. For exactly 2 years and 2 months. Then he set down the bank records. I have documentation for every single transfer. He looked directly at Jessica. Was that also part of protecting your sister's property? Jessica said nothing. Ryan jumped in immediately. That rent money covered expenses. His tone was defensive now, aggressive. That house costs money. Property taxes, insurance, repairs. Wilson didn't even blink. Property taxes on this home are approximately $3,000 a year. He flipped another page. Insurance costs roughly $1,100 annually. Another pause. Then, over that period, you received nearly $100,000. He pushed the papers forward. Those numbers don't come close to matching, son. I watched Ryan's face turn red all the way to his ears. My mother suddenly stood up from the couch, twisting her hands together nervously. Mom, this is getting out of control. She looked at Grandma desperately. We did this for Emily. You weren't here. Someone had to make decisions. She pointed toward me. She wasn't doing well. She was depressed. She wasn't answering calls. And suddenly, I heard my own voice. Steady, stronger than I expected. I wasn't answering calls. Everyone turned toward me. I stood up, for the first time since arriving. Because all of you told Grandma I was unstable. I stared directly at Mom. You told her not to talk to me. That's why her letters stopped coming. A pause. Then I said quietly, Isn't that right, Mom? She froze. Couldn't answer. Dad suddenly jumped up. That's not true! He pointed at me angrily. We never told your grandmother not to contact you. Before I could answer, Grandma spoke for the first time in several minutes, and her voice cut through the room like a blade. David! Everyone turned. She slowly reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, then looked directly at my father. I still have your messages. Dad's face immediately changed. Grandma unlocked the screen and began reading. Margaret. She read slowly. Don't send Emily any money. She'll waste it. My mother's breathing stopped. Grandma continued. We're handling the house situation for her, so don't worry about it. Then another. Emily isn't mentally stable right now. Anything she tells you is just an excuse to get money from you. Grandma lowered the phone, then calmly asked, Would you like me to read every single message out loud? Dad slowly sank back onto the couch. Silent. Not a word. Mom turned toward him. And for the first time all afternoon, I watched something crack in her face. She stared at him, horrified, then whispered, You sent her that? And suddenly, I knew this dinner wasn't over, not even close. The real destruction was only beginning. Mom kept staring at Dad. Her face had gone completely pale. Like everything she thought she understood had suddenly collapsed underneath her. She took one slow step backward, then another, still looking at him. "You sent her that?" she asked again. Dad swallowed hard, didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. That silence said everything. Mom shook her head slowly, like she was trying to wake herself up from a nightmare. Then suddenly she snapped toward him. "David," her voice cracked. "We agreed we were only managing the house until Emily got back on her feet." She pointed at Jessica. "We never agreed to tell your mother she was mentally unstable. We never agreed to lie about her like that." Dad stood up fast, his face immediately turning defensive. "You signed the lease agreement, Linda." He pointed right back at her. "You and Jessica were the ones who arranged the deal with Ryan's parents." His breathing became heavier, angrier. "Don't stand there acting innocent now. You were the one who told me." And then he stopped. Too late, because the words had already escaped. The entire room froze. Jessica slowly turned toward Mom, her eyes narrowing. Dad covered his mouth with one hand, like somehow he could shove the words back inside. But it was over. The lie was sitting right there in the middle of the living room, exposed, with the turkey going cold on the dining table, and all three of them, my parents and my sister, were suddenly turning against each other, arguing over who had started what, who had said what first, who was more guilty, and I just stood there watching. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one stuttering. I wasn't the one apologizing. I wasn't the one shrinking myself to make everyone else comfortable. I stood completely still, hands resting by my sides, watching them tear each other apart all on their own. Attorney Wilson calmly gathered a few papers, then placed them neatly back inside the folder. "Good." His voice was perfectly controlled, professional. "I believe the legal situation is now perfectly clear for everyone involved." He closed the folder halfway, then looked directly at Jessica and Ryan. "Mrs. Margaret Harper asked me to explain your options." He turned toward Jessica first. "You have two choices." He raised one finger. "Option 1. You return every dollar you illegally collected by renting out property that never belonged to you. You immediately surrender any claim over this property, and this matter remains inside the family." He raised a second finger. "Option 2. His voice became colder. "We settle this in court." A pause. Then, "And I strongly recommend you do not choose option 2. Jessica slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red now, but there was still poison inside them. I knew that look. It meant she wasn't done fighting, not even close. She stared directly at Attorney Wilson, then said, "And what if we don't return anything?" She crossed her arms, trying to sound confident. "That money is gone." Grandma finally sat down, slowly, in the only empty chair left. She carefully adjusted her purse over her knees, then looked at Jessica. Calm, too calm. And somehow, that calmness was more terrifying than if she had screamed. Finally, she spoke. Then, a pause. "We'll have to talk about the house you and Ryan are currently living in." Jessica's face changed instantly. Her eyes widened. Ryan turned slowly toward her, confused. Grandma kept going. "The one that's under your father-in-law's name." Another pause. Then she leaned forward slightly. "Because it just so happens..." She stared straight into Jessica's eyes. "I know exactly where the down payment for that house came from." Nobody breathed. Grandma opened her purse again, pulled out another folder, and placed it on the table. "And I happen to have those documents too." Jessica went white again, even paler than before. Ryan slowly turned toward her. But this time, it wasn't confusion anymore. It was realization, like only now. After everything, he was beginning to understand exactly what kind of person he had married. The room stayed silent for nearly 10 seconds. Then Ryan asked quietly, "Jessica." His voice was shaking now. "What is she talking about?" Jessica opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Ryan stared harder. "Jessica." Now louder. "What is she talking about?" And suddenly, for the first time that entire night, I saw fear in my sister's eyes. Real fear. Not embarrassment, not nervousness. Fear. Because she finally understood something. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This wasn't another lie she could smooth over with fake tears. This wasn't another situation where I would stay quiet. No. This time, she had gone too far, and Grandma had come prepared for war. 3 days after Thanksgiving dinner, Grandma showed up outside my cousin's apartment building at 8 in the morning. She was driving a rented gray sedan that still smelled brand new. There were 2 coffees sitting in the cup holders. She rolled down the window. "Get in," she said. "It's time for you to finally see your house." I climbed in without saying much. We drove for almost an hour and a half outside Phoenix, heading toward a lake district where the air felt cleaner and the trees were starting to turn orange from late autumn. I sat there quietly, coffee in both hands, watching the houses outside grow bigger, farther apart, more expensive. Halfway through the drive, I finally spoke. "Grandma." She kept her eyes on the road. "Why didn't you tell me about the house sooner?" I hesitated. "I could have." She tightened her hands slightly around the steering wheel. "I did tell you before I left." Her voice stayed calm. "I told you I had done something to make sure you'd be okay." A pause, then quieter. "What I never imagined was that your own family would hide my letters and convince me that you wanted nothing to do with me." Her jaw tightened. 3 years, Emily. 3 years thinking you resented me." I stared out the window, then answered softly, "I thought you resented me too." Neither of us said anything after that. Outside, I started seeing flashes of water through the trees, the lake. Gray, still, beautiful. Eventually we turned onto a gravel road, and then I saw it. Immediately. I recognized it from Jessica's Instagram photo, the giant deck, the beautiful lakefront view, except now, seeing it in person, it was even bigger, even more beautiful. There was a wooden dock stretching into the water, flower pots by the front entrance, massive windows reflecting the lake. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. That house was mine. It had been mine for over 2 years, while I was sleeping on someone else's couch. Grandma parked, stepped out, walked straight to the front door, and rang the bell. A man in his 70s opened, white hair, wool sweater, completely confused expression. Grandma smiled politely. "Good morning. Sorry for arriving unannounced." She gestured toward me. "I'm Margaret Harper. And this is my granddaughter, Emily." Then calmly, "We need to speak with you and your wife. It's about the house." The man introduced himself, Frank Brooks. A few seconds later, his wife walked out behind him, Carol, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. They looked exactly like the kind of older couple that offered you coffee before even knowing why you came, and that's exactly what they did. They invited us inside. The house smelled like fresh bread. I stood there looking around. My hardwood floors, my kitchen, my windows, my house. Grandma wasted no time. She sat down, folded her hands on the table, and looked directly at them. "Frank, Carol, what I'm about to say is going to upset you, and I need you to understand right now, I'm not here to throw you out. And I'm not blaming either of you." They exchanged nervous looks. Grandma continued, "The house you are currently living in," she pointed toward me, "legally belongs to my granddaughter." Frank frowned immediately. "That can't be right." He shook his head. "We rent this place from Jessica, our son's wife. We signed a lease agreement. We pay every month." I finally spoke. My voice came out weaker than I wanted. "Do you still have the lease?" Carol stood immediately, without saying a word. A minute later, she returned holding a thick folder. The woman clearly kept everything. Receipts, transfer confirmations, documents. She carefully laid everything on the table. My hands started shaking again. I grabbed the lease agreement and stared. At the very top it said, "Landlord, Jessica Harper." My sister's name. Nothing else. Not mine. Not Grandma's. Nothing. Jessica had rented out my house, as if it belonged to her. She had written up a fake lease agreement and had been charging her own in-laws $4,000 a month. Carol slowly sat down again. Her face looked sick. Then quietly she said, 4,000. She looked embarrassed now, ashamed. Jessica told us it was a fair price for this area. She said she was giving us a family discount. Her eyes filled slightly. Frank sold his truck to pay the deposit. We've been here for over 2 years. I watched Frank's face slowly harden. The muscles in his jaw tightened. He stared straight at me, then at Grandma, and finally said, "Are you telling me?" His voice was low now, dangerously low. "That my daughter-in-law has been charging us rent." He paused. "For a house she doesn't even own?" Carol covered her mouth. Grandma answered, calmly, coldly. "You have paid nearly $100,000 directly into Jessica's bank account." Frank stood up immediately, walked to the large living room window, hands on his waist, staring silently at the lake. Carol began quietly crying, the kind of crying older people do, soft, exhausted, like they've spent a lifetime learning how to cry without making noise. Then she whispered, "I told Ryan something felt wrong." She wiped her eyes. Every time we asked Jessica about paperwork, she changed the subject. Her voice broke. She kept saying she'd send it over soon. Then suddenly she looked toward her husband. "Frank." Her face twisted. "I told you." I sat beside her, still holding the fake lease agreement, and suddenly I felt horrible. For 3 days. I had been angry at Ryan's parents, imagining them as accomplices. Imagining them happily enjoying my house while I struggled, but they weren't accomplices. They were victims too. 2 elderly people who had sold a truck and been manipulated exactly the same way I had, just with better manners. And suddenly, I understood. Jessica hadn't just stolen from me, she had stolen from everyone. Carol kept wiping her eyes with the edge of the kitchen towel. Frank was still standing by the window, staring out at the lake. His shoulders looked tense now, like he was trying very hard not to explode. Grandma slowly reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Then she looked at both of them. "Frank, Carol, I'm going to ask you for a favor." She leaned forward slightly. "And I need you to understand, you have every right to refuse." They both turned toward her. Grandma continued, "My attorney is going to need copies of all these documents." She tapped the stack of papers on the table. "The lease agreement, the transfer receipts, everything you have." She paused, then softer, "Not to get either of you into trouble, but to prove what Jessica did." Frank slowly turned away from the window. His expression had completely changed now. The confusion was gone. The kindness, too. Now all I saw was anger. Cold anger. The kind older men carry quietly. He looked directly at Grandma, then said, "Take whatever you need." A pause, then he shook his head. "That woman made fools out of us." His eyes moved toward me, and softened immediately. "And she made a fool out of her own sister." Carol stood up. Without saying anything, she walked to another room. A minute later, she came back carrying an old scanner, the kind people had 10 years ago. Bulky, slow. She set it on the counter and began feeding pages through one by one. Grandma started taking photos of every document with her phone as backup, and I sat there organizing the originals into neat piles. Something strange hit me. My hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time since learning the truth, I felt calm. Before we left, Carol disappeared into the kitchen. She returned carrying a loaf of fresh bread wrapped carefully in a cloth napkin. She placed it in my hands gently, like it was the only thing she could offer me. Then she smiled sadly. "When all of this is over?" Her eyes moved toward the windows, toward the lake. "This house is finally going to be yours for real." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And if you'll let us..." Frank stepped beside her, smiling weakly. Carol finished the sentence. "We'd like to stay." A pause. "As honest tenants this time." Frank nodded, "Paying what the place is actually worth." Then he smiled bitterly. "To the right person." I tried to answer, but my throat tightened, so I simply nodded. That was all I could manage. Back in Grandma's car, I placed the folder carefully on my lap and held it tightly with both hands. She drove in silence, about halfway back to Phoenix. My phone buzzed. I looked down. "Jessica." A text message. "We need to talk." A second message immediately followed. "Just you and me." Then another. "No lawyers." And finally, "We're sisters. We can fix this peacefully." I stared at the screen, then flipped the phone over face down on top of the folder. I didn't answer that day. I didn't answer the next day either. I let her keep texting. 3 more messages, each one less sweet than the one before. "Are you seriously going to let a lawyer destroy this family?" Another. "Mom is falling apart because of all this." And another. "Don't be bitter, Emily. You were never like this." That last message almost made me laugh. I called Attorney Wilson before making any decision. He listened quietly, then said, "You can meet with her if you want." A pause. Sometimes it helps to hear what the other side is offering. Then his tone changed. Professional. Serious. "But do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything verbally. And if the conversation turns ugly..." He paused. "Stand up and walk away." So we agreed to meet. A coffee shop downtown. Crowded on purpose. Public. Safe. I arrived early. Ordered coffee, and sat facing the front entrance. Exactly how Grandma told me to. 15 minutes later, Jessica walked in. She was wearing sunglasses. even though the sky outside was completely overcast. She removed them as she sat down. Her eyes looked swollen, like she had been crying. But somehow, her makeup was still perfect. She looked at me and forced a smile, then said softly, "Thank you for coming." She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. I didn't move. Instead, I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. Jessica left her hand hanging there for a second, then awkwardly pulled it back. She took a deep breath, trying to sound emotional, trying to sound sincere. "Okay?" She nodded slowly. "You're angry." "I understand that." She leaned back, preparing herself, then finally said, "Emily, things just got out of control." And the second she said those words, I already knew. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to negotiate. Jessica took a slow breath, then leaned forward slightly. Her voice softened. That fake softness I had known my entire life, the one she used whenever she wanted something. "Emily, things got out of control." She looked down for a second, then back at me. "Nobody wanted any of this to happen." I said nothing. She kept going. "When Grandma bought the house, you were in a really bad place back then, remember?" She tilted her head sympathetically, like she actually cared. "You had lost your job. You were struggling emotionally." I interrupted immediately. "I wasn't struggling emotionally, Jessica." My voice stayed calm, cold. "I had 2 jobs and couldn't afford rent. That's not the same thing." She rolled her eyes slightly, just for a second, then quickly corrected herself. "Fine. Whatever." She waved her hand. "The point is, somebody had to take care of the property." She pointed toward herself proudly. "And we did. We kept it maintained. Protected it. If it had been left entirely to you," she shrugged, "that house would have been abandoned by now." I stared at her. It was almost impressive. Even sitting there, with all the evidence already exposed, she was still talking like she had done me a favor. I slowly set my coffee down, then asked, "So that's why I'm here?" I tilted my head. "To hear you explain why secretly renting out my house to your in-laws was somehow helping me?" Jessica lowered her voice, then leaned closer across the table. Now came the real reason she wanted this meeting. I could feel it. "I came because I want to offer you a good solution." She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it across the table. "A solution that works for both of us." I unfolded it. Numbers, columns, calculations. She had planned this. Jessica smiled nervously, then explained. "Okay." She pointed at the paper. "You keep the house. Fine. It's yours. I get that now." She tapped the left side of the page. "But we forget about the rent money. The last 2 years. We erase all of that." She pointed again. "No lawsuits. No lawyers. No dragging mom and dad into more problems." Then, the part that almost made me laugh, she smiled, like she thought she was being generous. "And from now on, you and I manage the property together." She tapped both columns. 50-50, like sisters. I stared at the paper. 1 column for her, 1 column for me. She had literally written it all out. Something inside me suddenly went very still. Not anger, not sadness, something colder, clearer. For the first time in my life, I was seeing her exactly as she really was. I looked up, then said quietly, "Let me make sure I understand this." She smiled, thinking I was considering it. I continued. "You stole $100,000 in rent from a house that belongs to me." Her smile weakened. "You lied to Grandma for 3 years, convincing her I was mentally unstable." Now her expression hardened. I kept going. "You let me sleep on someone else's couch. You let me survive on instant noodles while you were posting photos online from my deck." The cafe had gotten quiet around us. Or maybe I had just stopped noticing everything else. Then I pointed at the paper and asked, "And your offer?" A pause. "Is that I forgive the $100,000 you stole?" Another pause. "And then I give you half of my future rental income?" Jessica pressed her lips together, annoyed now, then muttered, "You're making it sound horrible." I looked directly into her eyes. "It is horrible." That fake sweetness disappeared instantly, like dust falling off a wall. Her face changed completely. Now I was looking at the real Jessica. Cold, sharp, cruel. The same girl I had grown up with. She leaned closer. Her voice dropped. "This is the last time I offer you an easy way out." Then she smiled. But there was no warmth in it, only threat. Because if this goes to court, she crossed her arms. Everybody loses. I said nothing. She kept going. You'll be the girl who destroyed her own family over money. Mom won't speak to you again. Dad won't either. Her eyes narrowed, and then came the final attack, exactly where she knew it hurt. And I'll tell everyone exactly what they already know. She leaned even closer, whispering now, that you've always been unstable. My jaw tightened. Jessica smiled wider, then said quietly, "Who do you think people will believe?" She pointed at herself. Me? Married. Successful. Homeowner. Then she pointed at me, her eyes full of contempt. Or you, a pause. The girl sleeping on her cousin's couch? And finally, there she was, the real Jessica. The girl I had known since childhood. The girl who always knew exactly where to press the knife. I slowly grabbed my purse, then stood up. Jessica frowned immediately. I looked at her calmly, then said, "Thank you for coming." The exact same words she had said to me. Her eyes widened. "Emily, sit down," her tone sharp now. "Don't be dramatic." I stared at her one final time, then said, "Goodbye, Jessica." And I walked away, without looking back. For the first time in my entire life, I walked away. The second I stepped outside the coffee shop, my legs started shaking, but I didn't turn back. Behind me, I heard Jessica calling my name, once, twice. She never got up from the chair. I kept walking. I passed a woman pushing a stroller, turned the corner, and only then. I leaned against the cold brick wall of a nearby building and finally let out the breath I'd been holding for the last 30 minutes. My palms were soaked with sweat. I wiped them against my jeans. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to anything. I had stood up, and I had walked away. For the first time in my entire life. Still standing there, I pulled out my phone and called Attorney Wilson. He answered immediately. "Well," I swallowed. "She offered to split future rent with me." A pause. "And forgive the $100,000. I let out a bitter laugh. "She also threatened to tell everyone I'm mentally unstable if this goes to court." Wilson stayed silent for a second, then asked, "Did you record any of it?" I froze. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even thought about that. "No." Another pause, then his calm voice returned. "Don't worry, we don't need it." He sounded almost amused. "We already have the fake lease agreement with her signature. We have the bank transfer records from Mr. and Mrs. Brooks. We have the messages your father sent your grandmother. That's more than enough." Then his tone changed slightly, more serious. "Are you absolutely sure you don't want to settle this privately?" A pause. "Because the moment I file formal notice, there is no going back to a friendly resolution." I closed my eyes. And suddenly, 3 images flashed through my head. Carol telling me Frank had sold his truck. Me counting coins for bus fare. Jessica's stupid piece of paper with 2 columns. Half for her, half for me. I opened my eyes and said, "Send it." 3 days later, a courier delivered a legal envelope to Jessica and Ryan's house. Inside was the formal lawsuit. A demand for repayment of the $100,000 in illegally collected rent, plus interest. Plus a formal requirement that they permanently surrender any legal claim over the lake house. I found out they received it because that night, my phone exploded. Jessica, Mom, Dad. An unknown number I later found out was Ryan. Call after call after call. I answered none of them. I turned my phone on silent, placed it face down on my cousin's kitchen table, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the entire night. 3 weeks later, the settlement meeting was scheduled. Attorney Wilson's office. Large conference room, long polished table, leather chairs, a glass pitcher of water sitting untouched in the center. On one side sat Grandma, Attorney Wilson, and me. Across from us sat Jessica and Ryan, alongside a lawyer they had hired. Young guy, probably early 30s, the type who kept checking his watch every 30 seconds. My parents came too. Even though technically they weren't part of the lawsuit, they sat against the back wall. Like spectators watching their own disaster unfold, Attorney Wilson opened his folder. Completely calm, like always. Then he began. "Let's save everyone some time." He looked around the room. "We have a lease agreement signed by Mrs. Jessica Harper for a property she never legally owned." He turned a page. "We have 26 months of payment records from Mr. and Mrs. Frank and Carol Brooks. who have already signed sworn statements. Another page. And we have written messages proving Mrs. Margaret Harper was intentionally misled and told her granddaughter was mentally incapable of managing her own assets. Then he closed the folder and finally said, "If this goes to court." He looked directly at Jessica. "This stops being a financial dispute." A pause. Then, "We are now discussing fraud." Another pause. "And falsification of legal documents." The young lawyer beside Jessica cleared his throat nervously, then said, "My client is willing to discuss a reasonable settlement." Wilson nodded once, then replied immediately, "Good." He slid a stack of papers onto the table. "The terms are simple." He raised one finger. "First, Mrs. Jessica Harper repays the full $100,000 illegally collected." He looked toward Ryan. "Since we understand she does not currently have liquid funds available, a formal payment plan will be established through a signed promissory note." Second finger. "Second, as collateral," he glanced at Jessica, "a legal lien will be placed against your only significant assets, which currently include your vehicle and household property." Third finger. "Third, Jessica Harper signs immediate and permanent surrender of any present or future claim regarding ownership of the lake property." Fourth finger. "And finally, all related documentation must be surrendered immediately." Then he leaned back, completely expressionless. "In exchange..." A pause. "My client agrees not to pursue criminal charges." Jessica's face twisted immediately. She leaned toward her lawyer and whispered something aggressively. The lawyer whispered back. I couldn't hear the words, but judging by Jessica's expression, I already knew what he was telling her. She had nothing left to fight with, and she knew it. But then suddenly, Jessica slammed her hand on the table, and everything changed. Jessica slammed both hands against the conference table. The sharp sound echoed through the entire room. Even the young lawyer beside her jumped slightly. She was breathing hard now, her face flushed red. All the fake politeness was gone. She pointed directly at me. "This is insane." Her voice trembled with anger. "She gets to keep $1 million house." She jabbed her finger harder toward the documents. "And now she's draining me too?" Grandma didn't even look at her. She simply adjusted the sleeve of her jacket, then calmly said, "That house has always been hers." She finally lifted her eyes, straight at Jessica. "You're the one who drained her for over 2 years." A pause, then colder. "Don't confuse the victim with the thief, Jessica." Jessica immediately turned toward the back of the room, toward Mom and Dad. Her voice cracked, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was desperation. "Are you seriously not going to say anything?" She stood halfway from her chair. "You're just going to let them do this to me?" The room went silent. A long silence. Mom sat there frozen, her fingers tightly intertwined on her lap. Dad stared at the floor, not moving, not breathing. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jessica." She shook her head slowly. "Enough." Jessica stared at her, completely stunned. Mom slowly lifted her eyes, but she wasn't looking at Jessica anymore. She was looking at me, straight at me. And suddenly, for the first time in years, she looked ashamed. Really ashamed. Her voice trembled. "Emily," she swallowed hard. "Your father and I..." A pause. Then finally, "We told your grandmother you weren't doing well." The entire room stayed silent. Mom continued. Tears were already forming now. "We told her you couldn't be trusted with money, that you were unstable." She shook her head. "It wasn't true." I stared at her, unable to move. She kept going. "Jessica convinced us it was better this way. She said if Grandma gave you that kind of money," her voice cracked harder, "you would waste everything." Then she said something I never expected to hear, something I had wanted my entire life, and somehow, hearing it hurt more than never hearing it at all. She looked directly at me and whispered, "Because taking from you..." A pause, then tears rolled down. "Was easier." I said nothing. Nobody moved. Mom wiped her face, then continued. "You never asked for anything. You never fought back. You always just accepted things." She looked broken now, completely broken. "It was easier to take from you than from everyone else." Something inside my chest tightened. For years, I had imagined hearing an apology from my family. I thought it would feel healing, like closure. Instead, all I felt was emptiness, a hollow space. Dad finally spoke, still staring at the floor. He sounded 10 years older. "I sent those messages." A pause. "My phone." "My words," He slowly shook his head. I can't deny it. Then finally, he looked at me, and I saw it. Regret. Real regret. His eyes were wet now, too. I failed you, Emily. His voice broke. I pushed you outside. He swallowed hard. So there would be more left inside for everyone else. The words hit me harder than anything else. Harder than the stolen money. Harder than the lies. Harder than the fake lease. Because suddenly, everything I had felt growing up made sense. Why I always felt like the extra child. Why I always sat on the edge of the couch. Why I learned so young not to ask for anything. Jessica stared at both of them like they had betrayed her, her mouth slightly open, disbelief. Then she snapped, I can't believe this. She pointed furiously at them. You're taking her side? Dad leaned back in his chair, exhausted, completely exhausted, then quietly said, There are no sides. He finally looked at Jessica, and his voice became colder than I had ever heard. There's what you did. A pause, then. And what we allowed you to do. The young lawyer slowly pushed the documents closer to Jessica and pointed one by one to every signature line. Jessica grabbed the pen, but she didn't sign immediately. She just sat there, holding it, staring at me, waiting. I knew what she expected, for me to say something, to soften, to do what I had always done, give in, like I always had. I didn't move. I simply folded my hands together on top of the table and waited. Then finally, Jessica lowered the pen and signed the property surrender agreement, the repayment agreement, the promissory note, the release of documents. Every time the pen scratched against the paper, it made a dry little sound. And with every signature, something that had been squeezing my chest for years started loosening, little by little, until suddenly, I could breathe again. But then, for the first time during the entire meeting, Ryan finally spoke. And what he said made Jessica's face lose all color. Ryan had stayed silent during almost the entire meeting. He hadn't interrupted, hadn't defended Jessica, hadn't looked at me once. He just sat there, watching everything collapse. But the second Jessica finished signing the final document, he finally spoke. Quietly, too quietly. Yet somehow, everyone in the room heard every word. He wasn't looking at Attorney Wilson. He wasn't looking at Grandma. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly at Jessica, and he said, My parents sold their truck for this. Jessica froze. Ryan kept staring at her. His voice hardened. They trusted you because you were my wife. He shook his head slowly, like he still couldn't believe what he had just learned. For 2 years. You never told me any of this. He leaned back in his chair, eyes cold now, completely different from the man I had met at Thanksgiving. Not once. Jessica opened her mouth. Ryan, I can explain. He cut her off immediately. No, his voice stayed low, dangerously low, the kind of voice people use when they've already reached their limit. When we get home? A pause, then. You and I are going to have a very serious conversation. Jessica's face drained instantly. Attorney Wilson calmly gathered the signed documents, checked every signature, then neatly stacked everything together. Finally, he turned toward me and slid one final paper across the table. I stared at it. It was the signed surrender agreement, Jessica's signature at the bottom, her official legal release, permanently giving up any claim over my house. Attorney Wilson leaned closer and smiled faintly, then quietly said, Congratulations, Miss Harper. He tapped the paper once. The property is now entirely yours. No disputes. No claims. No shadows hanging over it anymore. I picked up the paper, held it against my chest, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. Not because I was scared, because suddenly, after 3 years of surviving, I didn't know what it felt like not to be fighting anymore. The meeting ended. People stood, chairs scraped against the floor. Nobody said much. I walked toward the elevator beside Grandma, still holding the document against my chest. She slipped her arm gently around my shoulders, and suddenly, that familiar perfume hit me. The same perfume she wore when I was little. The same scent I remembered from birthday parties, from Christmas mornings, from being a child who still thought family meant safety. My throat tightened instantly, but I didn't cry. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. When the elevator doors opened downstairs, we stepped outside. Cold afternoon air, for the first time in weeks. I felt light, then suddenly, Emily, I turned. Mom was running toward me. Her eyes were red. She stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. Then quietly asked, "Do you think—" She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Do you think you'll ever forgive us?" I stood there for several seconds, thinking, and I realized something. For years, I had wanted their apology, their validation, their love, their approval. I had spent my whole life starving for it, but standing there in that parking lot, with my grandmother beside me, with the deed to my house pressed against my chest, I realized something terrifying. I didn't need any of it anymore, so I answered honestly. I looked at her and said, "I don't know, Mom." A pause, then softer, "But I don't need you to ask anymore in order to be okay." I watched the words hit her, and I understood. That was the difference now. Before, my entire life depended on whether my family accepted me. Now, it didn't. I turned around, got inside Grandma's car, and as we drove away, I watched my entire family growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Exactly the way I had spent years becoming smaller inside their world. Only now, I was the one leaving, and they were the ones being left behind. A few weeks later, I moved into the lake house. It was a Saturday in December. I owned exactly 3 boxes and 1 suitcase. That was everything I had, and somehow, it felt like more than enough. I moved into the lake house on a cold Saturday in December. 3 cardboard boxes, 1 suitcase. That was everything I owned. Frank and Carol helped me carry everything inside, even after I told them at least 10 times that they didn't need to lift anything. Because yes, they stayed. After everything was settled, I sat down with them in the kitchen, the same kitchen that always smelled like fresh bread, and told them the truth. The house was huge, too huge for one person. And if they wanted to stay, they could stay. As tenants. Real tenants. Paying what the property was actually worth. Not the ridiculous $4,000 Jessica had been squeezing out of them every month. Frank immediately argued. Not to lower the rent. To raise it. Because apparently that was just the kind of man he was. In the end, we split the house. They took the downstairs floor. I took the upstairs. I had my own entrance. My own balcony. My own view overlooking the dock and the lake. That first night, I slept upstairs in an empty bedroom, on a mattress directly on the floor. Exactly the same way I had slept for the previous 3 years, except this time. The window faced the water, and outside, I could hear the lake gently brushing against the wooden dock. I turned off the lights. And then something strange hit me. For the first time in years, I didn't have to set an alarm for 5 in the morning, no restaurant shift, no rushing to catch buses, no standing on sore feet for 12 hours straight. I stayed awake for a long time, not because I was anxious, because I couldn't believe it. Around 2 in the morning, I went downstairs for water and found Carol awake too. She was standing in the kitchen warming milk on the stove. She smiled when she saw me, then poured a second mug. We sat there quietly together, barely speaking. Finally, she laughed softly. "I never sleep well on the first night in a new house." Then she looked around and smiled. "Although, I guess technically, this isn't new for me anymore." Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Carol started leaving fresh bread on the kitchen counter every Sunday morning. Frank fixed things around the house before I even noticed they were broken. A loose cabinet hinge, a faucet drip, a porch light. Without realizing it, I had somehow ended up with the grandparents life had never given me on one side, and nearly lost on the other. The first job I quit was data entry. The restaurant job lasted another 2 months. Then one afternoon, Grandma sat me down in the kitchen. Same smell of bread, and she looked at me very seriously. "You've spent enough time serving other people." She folded her arms, then added, "I didn't work quietly for 40 years, building everything I built, just so my granddaughter could keep earning $14 an hour." A week later, she loaned me money to go back to college. To finish the degree I had abandoned halfway through because I couldn't afford tuition anymore. And yes, loaned, not gave. Loaned. There was literally a signed agreement and everything. When I asked why she insisted on making it official, she smiled, then said, "Because I need you to pay it back." I frowned. She laughed, then added, "So you'll finally believe you're capable of building something on your own." And she was right. As for Jessica, I learned about her life in fragments. She started making payments on the promissory note, month after month, small amounts, because she had no choice. Ryan moved out of their house a few weeks after signing the agreement, They didn't divorce immediately, but they stopped living together. Frank and Carol forgave Ryan pretty quickly. The second they understood, he genuinely had no idea what Jessica had been doing behind everyone's back. Jessica, they never forgave, and honestly, I don't think they ever will. Mom started calling me occasionally. At first, I kept conversations short, cold, distant. Over time, a little less cold. But I never became who I used to be, the daughter who accepted everything. The daughter who tolerated anything as long as she was allowed to exist somewhere quietly in the corner. That version of me never came back. That girl stayed behind on my cousin's couch, and she never woke up again. Sometimes on Sundays. Mom drives out to the lake. She sits in the kitchen with Carol. The two of them peel potatoes together and talk quietly, and I let them. Dad visits less often. Much less. When he does come, he barely speaks. One afternoon, he stood alone at the dock, staring at the water for almost 20 minutes, then quietly said, "That house." He kept staring at the lake. "It's the only good thing that came out of all this." Finally, he turned toward me and added, "I'm glad it belongs to you." I looked at him, then simply said, "Thank you, that was all." Some things don't heal completely, but sometimes they settle into place. Grandma stayed permanently. She never went back to Singapore. She told me she had spent enough years building things far away. Now it was time to stay close. She took the bedroom upstairs beside mine, and every morning, we drink coffee together while looking out over the lake, just like the first day she brought me here. Except now, I don't sit there quietly anymore, and I'm not afraid. Now, we talk. A lot. But the story still wasn't over, because 6 months later, Jessica came back, and this time, she wanted something, again. I finished college last year, and somehow, life turned ironic in the strangest way possible. I started managing rental properties. At first, just my own. Then slowly, other people began hiring me. Mostly older couples like Frank and Carol, people who simply wanted someone honest handling their investments. Turns out, I was actually very good with money. Very good. Which was funny, because my entire family had spent years convincing everyone, including me, that I wasn't, and eventually I understood the truth. I had never been bad with money, they just needed me to believe I was, because it benefited them if I stayed small. Jessica came to the lake house only once after everything happened, about 6 months after signing the settlement papers. I saw her car pull into the gravel driveway from my bedroom window, an old sedan I didn't recognize. I stepped outside onto the porch before she reached the front door, and I didn't invite her in. She looked different. No makeup, much thinner, hair tied back carelessly, exhausted. For a second, she almost looked human again. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, then quietly said, "I came to see if we could talk." I leaned against the wooden railing, waiting. She looked embarrassed, uncomfortable, then finally said, "Things are hard right now." She crossed her arms against the cold breeze. "Ryan filed for divorce." A pause. Then she looked away. "I'm paying you." "Paying rent? Paying everything alone." She swallowed hard, then forced a weak smile. And there it was, the real reason she came. Again, I was thinking. She looked at me carefully. "Now that things have calmed down, maybe you could reduce the payments on the promissory note a little." She took one step forward, then added softly, "We're sisters, Emily." I stood there looking at her, waiting for myself to feel something. Anger, satisfaction, pity, hatred, revenge. I felt almost nothing, just a quiet kind of exhaustion. So I answered calmly. When I was sleeping on my cousin's couch, I folded my arms. Things were hard for me too. Her face tightened immediately. I continued. "You remember posting photos from this deck?" I pointed behind me toward the lake. While I was surviving on instant noodles, Jessica said nothing. Couldn't. So I gave her the exact same answer she had once given me. Word for word, I looked directly into her eyes and said, "I'm going to tell you exactly what you told me at that coffee shop." A pause. "This is the last good offer you're getting." She stared, confused. I kept going. "Pay exactly what you signed for. Every dollar. No discounts. That's fair. That's the deal." Her lips tightened instantly. That same expression I had known my entire life. That same little twitch she made whenever she wanted to say something cruel. For a second, I thought she would. I thought the old Jessica would come back. The poison, the insults, the manipulation. But something had changed. She had nobody left to use those weapons on, so instead, she simply turned around, walked back toward her car, opened the door, and left. I watched her disappear down the gravel road, growing smaller and smaller, exactly the way I had spent years becoming smaller inside her world. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I simply closed the front door. Sometimes I think about that sheet of paper she slid across the table in the coffee shop, the one with 2 columns. Half for her, half for me. Like sisters. And I finally understood something. Jessica never realized that I never wanted half of anything she had. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want her life. I didn't want her marriage. I didn't want her approval. I only wanted one thing, what had always belonged to me. And I got it all back, yesterday. I drove home from work using the exact same highway where I used to stand inside crowded buses, back when I had $14 in my pocket, counting every stop, trying not to spend too much. Now, I drive that road in my own car, paid for by me, my name on the title, driving toward my own house, my name on the deed, and I don't do it so anyone can see me. I do it because now, I finally know what I'm worth, and no one will ever convince me otherwise again.